Good afternoon, class. Today we're going to be talking about photosynthesis. And if you do not know already, photosynthesis is the process by which light energy is converted into chemical energy and carbon is put into organic compounds. To understand photosynthesis, you should probably know the formula, which is as goes. 6 CO2 plus 12 H2O yields C6 H12 O6 plus 6 O2. Here, we can see that carbon and water are transformed to a sugar, glucose in this case, with oxygen as the waste product. This transformation takes place through the two main processes of photosynthesis, the light-dependent and light-independent reactions. The light-dependent reactions take place on the thylakoid membrane in the chloroplast of a plant. When light strikes a plant, it excites the photosynthetic pigments in the chloroplasts. In most plants, these pigments are chlorophyll A and chlorophyll B. These pigments absorb all of the light in the red, blue, and violet range. In the light-dependent reactions of photosynthesis, chlorophyll A is the primary pigment involved. Its alternating double and single bonds are the source of electrons that flow through the electron transport chain in photosynthesis. We will talk more about the electron transport chain later, but first, let's look at light-dependent
reactions take place on the thylakoid membrane in the chloroplast. These thylakoid membranes contain photosystems, which are light-harvesting complexes in the plant. When light hits the plant, it is absorbed first by photosystem 2. The P680 pigment in the photosystem absorbs energy, allowing electrons from the double bonds in the chlorophyll A molecule to become energized, moving to a higher energy level. These electrons become the primary electron acceptor in later steps of photosynthesis. Next, water is absorbed by the plant and is split by a process known as photolysis. These electrons replace the lost electrons from the chlorophyll A in photosystem 2. The two remaining oxygen atoms form one O2 molecule and are released into the atmosphere as a waste product. Next comes the electron transport chain of photosynthesis. During the electron transport chain, excited electrons from photosystem 2 are passed through the thylakoid membrane, providing the energy necessary to produce ATP. This process is often referred to as photophosphorylation, as it requires light energy to produce ATP. During chemiosmosis, ATP is actually formed for the first time. The protons that were released from water during the first stages of photosynthesis are pumped by the thylakoid membrane from the stroma, which is the space inside of the chloroplast, into the lumen, which is the space inside of the thylakoid. ATP is formed as these protons diffuse down the proton gradient through ATP synthase channels.
The final step of the light-dependent reactions is the absorption of energy by the photosystem 1. Energy is absorbed by the P700 pigment, and the electrons from the head of the chlorophyll A pigment become energized and are captured by a primary energy receptor. This process is nearly identical to the one that occurs in the photosystem 2, except that excited electrons are replaced by electrons from the P680 pigment rather than water. Photosystem 1 is also responsible for the production of NADPH, an electron carrier that carries hydrogen to the Calvin cycle to aid in sugar production. NADPH is formed when NAD picks up two protons that were released from the water molecule in the photosystem 2, creating the electron carrier NADPH. Normally, the plant would continue onto the Calvin cycle in what is known as the non-cyclic photophosphorylation. However, sometimes the plant runs low on ATP and enters cyclic photophosphorylation. During this process, only ATP is produced and no oxygen is released or NADPH is produced. Cyclic electron flow takes photoexcited electrons on a short-circuit pathway. Electrons travel from the P680 electron transport chain to the P700 to a primary acceptor, then back to the P680 electron transport chain.
Now we will move on to the light-independent reactions, also known as the Calvin cycle. While this process does not directly depend on light, it requires the products of the light-dependent reaction and ultimately occurs only in the light. The Calvin cycle is a process that contains many complex steps that are not necessary for the AP test, but it is important to understand the general process and a few key steps in the cycle. The Calvin cycle is a cyclical process that produces 3-carbon sugar phosphoglyceraldehyde, or P-gal for short. The main process of the carbon cycle is carbon fixation, which is the conversion of carbon to organic compounds. Calvin cycle. Carbon is absorbed through the stomates of a plant. Here, the carbon molecules become attached to a 5-carbon sugar known as RuBP, forming a 6th carbon molecule. The 6-carbon molecule is an unstable molecule and immediately breaks down into 2 3-carbon molecules of G3P. This reaction is catalyzed by Rubisco. After 6 turns of the Calvin cycle, 2 molecules of G3P are produced and combine to form glucose.
There you have it, photosynthesis.